Major funding for Frontline is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide.
Tonight on Frontline. The scene, Los Angeles, 1977. A frightening series of murders by the Hillside Strangler. One suspect, an all-American boy.
I've always wanted to go to California. The sun, the girls, the beaches, the dreams.
The kid I knew couldn't have ever hurt anybody or killed anybody.
This one I killed. This was the first one I killed.
The question, is he insane?
I was quite convinced that he was a full-fledged multiple personality.
I believe that he is playing a role and playing a part.
Through court-ordered videotapes, we examine with the experts the terrifying psychology of a killer, the mind of a murderer.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline.
Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. As unpleasant as it is to hear, mass murders are on the rise in this country. The Justice Department says that in the last decade, there have been at least 30 mass killers, and that each of them murdered at least 6 people. These gruesome numbers raise disturbing questions. What sort of man is Charles Manson or the son of Sam? Are they insane? That's sometimes the defense if they come to trial, and it's one that is increasingly controversial. Tonight on Frontline, a remarkable event. For the first time, you can journey with psychiatrists as they try to get inside the mind of a mass murderer. Kenneth Bianchi, the man who came to be known as the Hillside Strangler. Bianchi looked like an all-American boy, but he was involved in the murders of at least 10 women in Los Angeles and 2 more in Washington State. After his arrest, Bianchi took on the behavior of a multiple personality, and 4 experts concluded he was insane. But was he? Frontline has obtained exclusive access to over 60 hours of interviews videotaped after Kenneth Bianchi's arrest. So it is possible for us tonight to see and hear what happened behind the jailhouse doors, to see some of what the experts saw as they made up their minds about this man. The program is produced and directed by Michael Barnes. And a warning, there are brief but graphic photographs of the victims' bodies, as well as some strong language.
Oh, you want to get back to why I came to California? Well, I came there hoping to find a better job. I've always wanted to go to California. The sun, the girls, the beaches, the dreams. You don't think of the smog and the crazy city.
Our story begins 3 years after Kenneth Bianchi's arrival in Los Angeles in September 1977.
This is KFWB News. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vince Campagna. Here's the latest news at noon. Geneva talks on the test ban of nuclear weapons is stalemated by the 3 major powers, the United States, Britain, and Russia. KFWB's Jim Mitchell will report on the discovery of a nude woman's body found in the La Crescenta area and the ongoing investigation. The forecast for Los Angeles is going to be a beautiful weekend. It's a high tomorrow of about 77 degrees.
Glendale police have another apparent murder of a young woman on their hands. KFWB's Cecilia Pedroza has a direct report from Chevy Chase Drive.
Another young woman has been found in the Highland Park area. I repeat, the body of another young woman has been found in the Highland Park area.
Since Sunday morning, the bodies of 3 other young girls aged 12, 14, and 20 have been found within a few miles of this spot. All of the killings have occurred within the past 4 weeks, all 10.
Members of the Hillside Strangler Task Force are trying to trace the last movements of a young Glendale woman, now listed as the Hillside Strangler's victim.
Most of the Strangler victims were found in the hills surrounding Los Angeles, often near freeways or in ravines. The victims were mostly teenagers and young women.
I wish I could come here and give you some good news. Unfortunately, I cannot. Apparently, he is very good. He has certainly not left us the kind of evidence that we would need to make a direct connect-up. If he had, we would have him in jail today.
Identikit pictures have so far failed to produce useful leads. Police psychologists believe he has a compulsion to repeat the crimes, and he will kill again.
This city was completely in the grip of the Hillside Stranglers. We spent hour after hour, night after night, right here in Hollywood. Hollywood is not what most people think of it, or as it's portrayed in movies. We were talking to people that, with no names, prostitutes, male and female, street people, people that were loaded, didn't know if it was daylight or dark, and because of that, we got a lot of false leads and a lot of bad information. Well, we had theorized early in the investigation the possibility of someone that had some police training or background or was familiar with police tactics.
We were forced to tell our citizenry not to stop for a police officer on a side street, to go to a lighted area, particularly young women. Go to a lighted area or drive to a police station. The police would follow them and wait to talk to them at that location because we felt it was too dangerous with this information in our possession to allow our citizenry to stop on the side streets for our officers.
Perhaps the most appalling in this series of murders was the murder of the two little girls. Dolly Cepeda and Sonia Johnson were 12 and 14 years old. These girls were considered good girls, family girls. They were not girls of the street. When they came here on Sunday afternoon, their families expected them to be safe. This shopping center is guarded and is in a safe area. We didn't have any idea where they went, where they were killed, who took them. We had no witnesses, we had no physical evidence, and all we had was 8 days later, we found the nude, raped bodies of these two young girls on a hillside not far from here.
All the victims had been raped and strangled to death. They included 19-year-old Yolanda Washington, 15-year-old Judith Miller, 21-year-old Lisa Caston, and 20-year-old Christina Weckler, 14-year-old Sonia Johnson, 12-year-old Dolly Cepeda, 28-year-old Jane King, 18-year-old Lauren Wagner, 17-year-old Kimberly Martin, and 20-year-old Cindy Hudspeth.
What was so frightening about the Hillside Strangler was that the picture I had in my mind was of the average, ordinary man, someone that could be my colleague in the office, someone that could be waiting on my table in a restaurant, taking my tickets at the theater. He was not going to be a monster. He was going to fade into anonymity among all the other people. He was going to be somebody's loving son, loving husband, sweet brother, good neighbor. People were going to be surprised when we found out. And that was really frightening because you didn't have a way to guard yourself, to protect yourself, because it could have been anybody.
And then the murders stopped. 10 women had died in 5 months. They appeared to be perfect crimes. There were no clues. Almost 150 detectives had conducted the biggest manhunt in the history of Los Angeles. It failed, and the killer or killers remained at large. But as the weeks passed, there were no more murders, and the city began to relax. Nearly a year later, 2 young women, university students, were reported missing 1,100 miles north in Bellingham, a small lumber and fishing center just below the Canadian border in the state of Washington, a town with just 6 detectives.
Go ahead, sir.
Bellingham Police. Missing from where?
The girl reported missing to us was Karen Mandick. We then contacted her boyfriend, And he told us that she had received a job house sitting. This would be when a person goes away for some reason and leaves the house vacant. Security agencies here in the city of Bellingham will have people come to the home and stay in the home for a period of time, like to an hour, while they put in security alarm systems or something on this order. She was to receive $100 for this hour's work. With her at the time, she took her roommate, Diane Wilder. We contacted the security agency, and the person in charge of this particular house sitting told us that he did not know Karen or Diane.
But the police soon learned that, unbeknownst to the agency, one of their own security managers had lured Karen Mandic to the house with the promise of a well-paid job. Karen had been working at the Fred Meyer's department store. She was last seen driving her car to the house-sitting job. 18 hours later, the bodies of Karen Mandic and Diane Wilder were found in their car on this hillside overlooking Bellingham. They had been strangled.
There were no fingerprints in the vehicle. However, there were strangulation marks on the bodies, and at this point, it was decided to arrest the security guard, and this was a uniformed security guard. So arrangements were made with his boss to call him on the radio and have him dispatched to the South Terminal guard shack area, and we could arrest him there. As a uniformed security guard, he is armed, and this would be a much safer area for the police and everybody else to make an arrest of this type.
The man arrested was 27-year-old Kenneth Bianchi. He had left the Glendale area of Los Angeles a few months earlier and come to live here with his son and girlfriend, Kelly Boyd.
The kid I knew couldn't have ever hurt anybody or killed anybody.
What sort of person was he?
He was pretty thoughtful and real helpful with the baby, and even around the house he was real helpful. He just wasn't the kind of person that could have killed somebody.
His employers and colleagues could not believe it when Kenneth Bianchi was arrested.
I thought he was very good, professional-wise, as far as security officer, and I told his employer when he came to me that I'd like to have about 15 or 20 more like him because he handled his job very well, and I had a lot of faith in him, and he was dependable, and he carried himself very neat, and his uniform was very neat.
My girlfriend and I went down to the security office here and applied for our job, and he was the first thing that we saw walk around the corner for our interview. And we both went, wow, look at that hunk. And when we went in for an interview, he was talking about his little boy and just a really nice guy. And then he came out to visit us a few times and helped us take down our tree and sent us flowers for Christmas. Just an all-around good guy.
Could Ken Bianchi really be a killer? Even the chief of police had his doubts.
My impression was, and I mentioned it to Bob Knudsen from our department, that whoever did this is not the first time around. He's killed before. I think we both felt very strongly about that. On the other hand, the suspect, at that time, we knew somewhat his background, that he had been a security guard, was considered a good applicant for our own police department, was studying to be a sheriff's reserve officer, and that didn't really seem to blend with the evidence that this was someone who was not a neophyte killer.
To the lawyer appointed to defend him, Bianchi presented further peculiarities.
He seemed pretty normal, but there were some things that didn't fit. He indicated he didn't know anything about the homicides, and yet he gave a series of increasingly incredible explanations of what he had been doing on the night of the murders. And so I checked out the psychiatric background by calling Don Lundy from Stanford Medical School.
Dr. Lundy was clinical associate professor of psychiatry and had been an expert witness in the Patty Hearst trial.
The thing that puzzled me was that there were some things he seemed not to remember or had different versions of, which had no relation to the crime. And the two that stand out the most in my mind are his description of his mother as a wonderful, saintly kind of woman, when I knew from records from childhood and so on that was not the case. And secondly, the fact that he had no memory, he had a loss of memory, amnesia, as we would call it, for various events in his childhood, including periods when he was in psychiatric treatment. And so I was puzzled by this. But other than that, say, he seemed like a nice enough fellow.
This was how Bianchi came across to most of his interviewers.
I don't remember. I was just asked that not too long ago. I seriously don't remember.
Can't remember what you ran the 100 in?
It couldn't have been very good.
Oh, it might have been
I
good.
really don't remember.
Under 10?
I thought about it. No, I think it was more like 10-1, something like that.
Good for high school.
10-1. I was always physically fit through high school, through college. Always. Matter of fact, in college, I ran 2 to 3 miles every other day. I ran with a friend.
One of the original joggers.
Yeah, I just loved it. And
While psychiatrists continued to examine Bianchi, a Bellingham detective began telephone checks in Los Angeles because Bianchi had a California driver's license.
During that conversation, he related the facts of how their case occurred. Our investigator said, "Have you ever heard about the Hillside Strangler?" He said no, that he hadn't. He said, "I think you've got something there. It's awfully close to what we've been working on." Said he would get back to him. Subsequent to that, the investigator came to this machine, entered Kenneth Bianchi's name and his birth date, received this teletype from Department of Motor Vehicles. It says Kenneth Felicio Bianchi, 809 East Garfield, Apartment D. Christina Weckler, one of the victims, lived in Apartment C or E right next door at 809 East Garfield. Also, Cindy Hudspeth, our last victim, lived across the street at 800 East Garfield. With this teletype, we had tied him into 2 of the murders right away.
This looked like the break Los Angeles police had been waiting for. But could they prove it? They went to Bellingham, where Bianchi had been charged with murder, even though police there still had no conclusive evidence. 4 weeks after Bianchi's arrest, officers Nolte and Knudsen revisited the house where they believed the 2 women had been killed, not so much by strangling, but by hanging.
This staircase here in the city of Bellingham on Edgemore, after 4 or 5 weeks of working this house, is where we finally located the evidence that positively put the suspect with the 2 girls, and the homicide of the 2 girls occurred on this 6th step right here.
We discussed many times the method by which the girls were hung, and of course in a hanging there's a certain amount of violence, kicking, thrashing, and this residence had absolutely no sign of violence in it. There was no overturned furniture or anything, and the only place that it could logically have been done was within the stairwell. Fred and I came over and decided to start at the bottom of the stairwell and do a search, careful search for hairs and fibers. We spent 4 hours searching this stairwell. We started at the bottom with a bright light on our hands and knees and tweezers and worked our way up. When we got to the 6th step, we found a pubic hair, and when we got to approximately the 9th and 10th steps, we found long blonde and long dark-haired. These hairs were later identified as belonging to our 2 victims, and the pubic hair was identified as belonging to Ken Bianchi. These hairs were the final piece of evidence that tied this case together for us. It put the cap on it. It was over. We were ready to go to court.
That must have been quite a day.
It was a hell of a day.
But did Bianchi also commit the Los Angeles murders? L.A. detective Dudley Varney had his doubts. The methods of strangulation were different. The Bellingham bodies were clothed, and those in Los Angeles were naked. But Varney did bring back a set of Bianchi's fingerprints from Bellingham to compare with the prints found during the Los Angeles investigation. Still, there was no real reason to believe they would match.
This is the paw print of Kenneth Bianchi that was brought in by Dudley Varney. I immediately noticed, however, that he had a pattern in one of his fingers that we had been looking at for probably close to a year. So I immediately examined that one print. Here is an enlargement of the left ring finger of Kenneth Bianchi. The characteristics present in this latent fingerprint and the characteristics present in this exemplar matched. And from these characteristics, I was able to make the identification. The more I began to look, the more things began to fall in. And before too much longer, I was jumping around here like a ping pong ball. I was elated. It was unbelievable. 13 months of this kind of work and coming on to identifying a suspect on a case like this was just the greatest thrill of my life.
The police now felt that Bianchi was the Hillside Strangler and also had murdered the women in Bellingham. But had he acted alone?
We were looking for a co-conspirator on this series of crimes. We were looking for an associate. In our conversation with Kelly Boyd, we came up with one answer. The only person that Kenneth ran with was Angelo Bono. We said, well, who else does he see? Does he go out drinking with the boys at night or stop for a beer or play games or play baseball or anything? And she just shook her head and said, no, the only time he's away from home, he's with Angelo. He only has Angelo.
Angelo Bono was Kenneth Bianchi's cousin, with whom he had lived when he first came to Los Angeles. Bono was a hard-working, well-respected car upholsterer who had renovated many antique cars for show business personalities. There was nothing to link him with any of the murders, but the police put him under 24-hour surveillance. Back in Bellingham, despite the fingerprint evidence, Bianchi continued to insist on his innocence.
Between the publicity and the damage it's done to my family and to myself, and to a point of where my lawyer and I just couldn't see eye to eye because I knew what I had done and I hadn't killed any girls.
But police evidence was so strong that Bianchi's lawyers began to investigate whether his failure to remember meant he had serious psychological problems. Investigation now focused not on his guilt, but on his state of mind. Dr. John Watkins, professor of psychology at the University of Montana, was asked by Bianchi's lawyers to use hypnosis to try to unblock Bianchi's memory. His arrival produced a sensational turning point in the case.
He seemed to be an easygoing, nice, friendly young man like the boy next door. He was much more concerned about what was happening inside of himself than he was in regards to what the law might do to him. He didn't believe he could possibly have done these crimes and refused to allow his attorney to plead an insanity defense. And I spent about the first hour getting acquainted with him.
Dr. Watkins visited Bianchi in the Bellingham jail. It was there that over 60 hours of interviews were eventually videotaped.
And we're going to be tape recording, just a regular audio recording. And we also have some videotape here, which we may use later. And we'll use it only because it could be of help to you.
I can't tell you, I'm terrified about this whole thing.
And if you agree to it.
No, I don't mind. Something inside of me was just boiling. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I just ran out like that. I just understand.
That's all right, Ken. I understand. I mean, I apologize. You feel okay now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Well, I'd like to try a little something to maybe understand you better, okay?
Bianchi agreed to allow Dr. Watkins to hypnotize him in an attempt to restore his memory.
You want me to sit back on
Yes. Close your eyes, Ken. You were telling me that you were feeling very uncomfortable. I was sort of wondering why that feeling of uncomfortableness.
Over the next few weeks, in a series of interviews that usually, but not always, included hypnosis, something totally unexpected happened. Dr. Watkins began to uncover an astonishing and different side to Kenneth Bianchi.
I could know a little more why that uncomfortableness is there. Yes.
Guess what? Hi.
Hi. Are you Ken?
Do I look like Ken?
Well, don't. Do you know who I am?
Sure, I know you are.
Okay. You're a little disturbed with me.
So what?
Okay. We just understand each other, don't we? Okay?
I don't like you. I don't like you at all.
Well, why don't you like me, Ken? Pardon me. It isn't Ken, is it?
No, it's not. It's Steve.
Oh, okay, Steve.
This entity merged, and when I asked him who it was Ken, he said, no, it's Steve. I then talked to Steve about his situation. He kept talking about how he hated that turkey, meaning Ken, and how he was fooling that turkey. He also began to talk about the murders, said that he had conducted the murders, that Ken didn't know anything about it, and he laughed very heartily as he described how Ken would lose a tremendous amount of time. He asked me, he said, how would you feel if you lost more time than a broken clock? He also began to mention about killing those girls down in Los Angeles.
Steve, the other personality, made a momentous confession. He admitted that he was the Hillside Strangler.
Yeah, I killed the first girl. You killed the first girl? Who was she here? Do you know her? That nigger. Oh? Yeah. That's Black Witch. I see. How did you happen to decide on her? Well, I didn't see anything wrong with it. It was just there.
I must admit that I was quite surprised when this came out because I had been thinking in terms of an amnesia, maybe only possibly a multiple personality, and only very possibly that he could be connected to the Hillside Strangler crimes.
Multiple personality is a rare mental disorder made famous in the books Three Faces of Eve and Sybil, and the movies which followed. These were true stories of people in whom two or more personalities existed in the same body. The claim that Bianchi, like Eve, had more than one personality transformed the case.
In a true multiple personality, there are completely separate personalities within the same body. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 or more. Each one has its own identity. Each one has its own behaviors, its mannerisms, its speech. And when one is out, it may be completely unaware of the existence of the others.
In later interviews, Steve, Ken's other personality, went on to say that his cousin Angelo was the other killer.
Which ones? See, I got your cake.
Okay.
You want to know which ones Angelo and I did away?
If you want to
think
tell me
I'm not going to tell you, huh?
I don't know whether you're going to tell me or not.
Huh?
I don't know whether you're going to tell me or not.
It's my decision, isn't it?
I guess it is. Right. You don't have to take credit for any of them. You don't want to.
Hey, man, it doesn't bother me any. I told you, killing a broad doesn't make any difference to me. Killing any fucking buddy doesn't make any difference.
Maybe you didn't kill any of those. I don't know.
Oh, hey, no, wrong, man. Hey, I killed a couple of these.
Well, which ones? You think you did. I don't know.
I killed her. Angelo killed her.
They mean the Wagner one Angelo killed.
This broad I'd never seen before.
Martin.
This broad I'd never seen before.
Hudspeth, you never saw them at all?
Nope.
Oh.
This broad I'd never seen before.
Robinson? Says.
This broad I killed. These two Angelo killed.
Wexler. Johnson.
This one I'd never seen before.
Angelo killed, huh?
This one I'd never seen before. This broad I killed.
Barcombe you never seen before. This Caston is the broad you killed, you say?
Am I going too fast for you?
Yeah, you're going so damn fast. I'm not that smart. Okay. I'm not as bright as you are, so let's
since I enjoy your taste here and your interest, and I'm really, very pleased that you've taken interest in this, I'm going to do you a favor. Let me borrow your script here, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll do you a favor so that you don't get lost along the way.
Okay, all right. You do me the favor.
It's real easy.
Yeah.
What you don't understand is this one I killed. These two I don't know about.
This one I don't know about. This one I killed. This was the first one I killed.
Yeah.
This one. This one. I remember that cunt. Could she have worn her hair differently or something?
I don't know. Fucking remember. How would I know?
Angelo will be a cross, okay? I'll make it nice and easy for you. He's my kind of man.
Okay.
There should be more people in the world like Angelo.
All right, the ones that Angelo's across, and which ones are you then?
I'm the X's.
Oh, you're the X's.
Yeah, you want me to write that down for you so you can remember?
Why don't you?
Dr. Watkins' investigation had uncovered a violent character, horribly different from the all-American boy, Kenneth Bianchi, whom everyone had come to know.
Some of them you didn't even know.
Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Bianchi's cousin Angelo denied any involvement. There was no evidence against him except what Steve had said.
Ken's attorney told me that some interesting things were coming out in the interviews, and he asked me if I'd ever heard of the book Sybil or Three Faces of Eve. And I had heard of Sybil, and so I asked him what he meant, how that related to Ken, and he said that under hypnosis that another personality or another part of Ken's personality seemed to come out, and it was someone that acted unlike anything that he had seen so far. And he asked me a lot of questions about what he was like before, and tried to find out if I had ever seen any of that personality that had shown up on tapes in the jail during the interviews. And from what they described, I'd never seen that.
What was the reaction of the Los Angeles police when they saw the videotapes?
I almost threw up. I've seen hypnosis before. I'd never seen anything quite like this. From that point on, it just looked like a sham.
I've still got my notebook where, after viewing the first tapes, I wrote in there, "This is bullshit," and underlined it 3 times.
And what was Ken Bianchi's reaction when he was finally shown the tapes?
Quite frankly, a little ways through the hypnosis session, it scared the hell out of me. I just really surprised. You know, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, and it just really bothered me really bad. I can't touch on all my feelings that I was having, but it just really bothered me. Matter of fact, I couldn't go any further far way through this one particular tape. And I stopped, and Dean talked to me, and John talked to me, and you know, they really helped a lot as far as, you know, putting some things in perspective and giving me support and things like that, you know, and reinforcing the feelings that I actually had, but I had buried, you know, to let these other feelings out when I was, you know, so disturbed by what I saw.
After viewing these tapes, Bianchi still said he could not remember the crimes and knew nothing of the personality called Steve. But for the first time, he did concede that his body must have done the murders. He entered an insanity defense before the Bellingham court on March 29, 1979. If successful, he could avoid the death penalty and perhaps eventually even win his freedom. The judge was faced with a dilemma. For 7 weeks, Bianchi had refused an insanity defense. Now he had changed his mind. A panel of experts was appointed. The question, was Bianchi truly a multiple personality? Dr. Ralph Allison, a California psychiatrist and leading authority on multiple personality, was called in to advise the judge. He was independent of both the defense and the prosecution.
The man was very pleasant, very nice, very courteous, you know, just an ordinary middle-class working fellow with a wife and child who had no idea how he got into this jam, totally baffled by it. And then during the session where he had gone into a trance, out came this monstrous personality that called himself Steve, admitted to the killings, and made it quite clear he didn't give a damn about human life.
Angelo went and picked her up. I was waiting on the street. He drove her around to where I was. I got in the car. We got in the freeway. I fucked her. and killed her. We dumped her body off, and that was it. Nothing to it.
The only thing I had to go on in any of this was matching him off against what I had come to know about the patients that I had treated myself. And there are three basic areas. One is a history, and one is his appearance right there in front of me, and the third is certain psychological tests that you might apply. And certainly we had a good deal of history from him, psychological workups in his youth and doctor's reports, and it showed a tremendous amount of pathology and difficulty in the family. And all of this, he was considered a very disturbed child.
We collected the psychiatric records of Ken Bianchi. To give you an example, he was trotted from doctor to doctor with a series of physical ailments. His eyes rolled, he had tics, he fell down, he had what they thought were petit mal seizures, and the doctor said, see a psychiatrist. His mother took him to the DePaul Clinic, and these are quotes from their report. Quote, Dr. Dowling reported that Kenneth is a deeply hostile boy who has extremely dependent needs which his mother fulfills. He depends upon his mother for his very survival and expends a great deal of energy keeping his hostility under control and under cover. There seems some basic confusion about his own identity. He tries very hard to placate his mother, but she always seems dissatisfied. To sum up, Dr. Dowling said that he is a severely repressed boy who is very anxious and very lonely. Now, I then contacted the psychologist who wrote that report when he was 11 years old. He responded, in my opinion, the psychological test data from 1962, when he was 11, are quite consistent with a subsequent condition of multiple personality.
During our interviews of the people that knew Bianchi, his co-workers, his friends, relatives, kids that he had grown up with, at no time were we able to come up with a personality change or a mood change.
He's a very, very smart man. And I believe to him this is a challenge. I believe that he is playing a role and playing a part. And I think it's part of his ego. I think he feeds his ego with it. And he's having a ball.
We didn't rely just on the records. We found, for example, in his basement, this statue. This was traced to a high school sculpture class. Now remember, the psychologists reported that he told them fun for him was playing games, scary games, in which he was the monster. This is the product of his sculpture.
The mother had been recommended for therapy, the child had been recommended for therapy, neither one had gone, so we knew no resolution had occurred. And then I did a hypnosis and tried to carry him back in time to see what kind of specific difficulties occurred between him and his mother.
When I stop at a certain age, I want you to feel as you were at that age, not as you think you should have been or what you hoped you might have been, but as you really were, and being able then to talk to me about whatever kind of problems occurred to you at that age, as if you are going through those problems very recently, but are now able to express them to me as if I was a counselor there for you at that time. I'll just count backwards slowly, and you allow your mind to gear into those age states as you get younger. 27, go down to 26, 25, 11, 10, and 9. I could talk to the 9-year-old Ken in any way that is comfortable for you. Being 9 years old, being aware of me, not being bothered by anything else, not being upset about what's in the surroundings. I'd like you to be the 9-year-old Ken telling me about what kind of important things have been going on with you in recent days. What's been going on, Ken?
I've been playing. Been a lot of fights between my mom and dad. Mom hits me a lot.
Your mom hits you?
And he was a very lonely child. He felt that his mother kept his playmates away. He was the victim of her anger at her husband, who was going out to the racetracks and losing a family paycheck. So she took it out on her son because husband wasn't there.
I don't want to get hit. When I do what I want to do, I get hit. I don't want to get hit anymore. She hits my dad, she hits me.
Where are you living now?
Big green house.
On what street?
Villa Street.
What town?
Rochester, New York.
How old are you?
Just turning 9.
How do you celebrate your 9th birthday?
I thought I'd have a cake and a lot of friends over, and Mom got mad at me. I didn't have any of my friends over. I was going to have a party, and there was no party.
Where do you hide?
Under my bed, in my closet, behind the house. The bed's the best place.
Do you ever hide inside your own head?
Sometimes, just to get away.
What do you do in there?
Talk.
Anybody else here to talk to?
My friend.
Who's that?
Stevie. He's my second best buddy.
Does he have a last name?
He did have a last name.
What was it?
I can't remember.
Well, what's Stevie?
Walker.
Walker. Oh, where did he get that name? Do you know his parents?
He didn't have any parents. Stevie was alone.
This is characteristic of multiple personalities because they just cannot run away physically. So they run away inside their minds. They create somebody who does the escape or handles it. It would seem that Ken coped with this by a process of denying that problems really occurred, that denying that his mother was being so hard on him. She was, in his mind, a very loving person, and he manufactured this fantasy. Of course, that didn't follow through. Then he would repress his feelings of anger toward her, bury them in his mind somewhere, and this then would be walled off from the rest of his mind as a sewer. That's what would later erupt. But at the time he was a child, he would pour more and more of his hostility, resentment toward her into this portion of his mind where he could store it up. Eventually, it would erupt. And when it erupted, these women got killed. They were raped and then killed. So I wrote a report to the judge stating my opinion. This is what I said to him. That he is a dual personality and has been so since the age of 9. At that time, he created an alter personality which took the name of Steve Walker. This was while he was hiding under the bed in his bedroom trying to escape his mother's vicious tongue and punishing hand. As time elapsed, Steve Walker became more and more independent in action and was able to take over the body of Kenneth Bianchi and caused a great deal of trouble in the family and later in the world outside the family. Then it concluded that Ken Bianchi is able to understand what he is charged with, but he has amnesia for the actual incidences during which his body was under the control of Steve Walker. Therefore, he has not been able to discuss his whereabouts, actions, and motives with his attorney, since all of that time is completely unknown to him. Steve Walker, on the other hand, does not consider Mr. Brett to be his attorney. Therefore, at the present time, I would not consider Ken Bianchi or Steve Walker competent to stand trial for the crimes charged. And that's what I reported to the judge.
But the Bellingham investigators were not impressed by the videotaped interviews, and even less impressed by Dr. Allison.
When he first came here and we were waiting to start a session, we were standing around outside the area talking, and he indicated that it was very important to him to establish this multiple personality because he was close to a world record number of finds of multiple personalities, and he was in writing a book or had a book going on this topic. And I felt that it was more important to him that the multiple personality be found than, in my mind, the facts of the case be brought forth.
The Los Angeles police never had the opportunity to talk to the Steve personality, so they decided to take Ken back to Los Angeles, to the streets from which the victims had been abducted, to retrace the steps of each crime. While they were doing this, Bianchi began to remember more about the murders than he had so far admitted to the doctors.
A couple of things that he told us about became very important in the case. One of the incidents was an incident involving Kathy Laurie. Kathy Laurie is a young daughter of Peter Laurie, a very famous Hollywood actor. Bianchi told us of this incident where they had stopped her on the streets in Hollywood, a short distance from here, around the time of the Judy Miller abduction, and using police badges, they had stopped her and told her that they were police officers. After asking her for identification, she presented a wallet. In the wallet, along with her identification, was a photograph of her as a youngster on her father's knee. And anybody that's grown up in this area or familiar with movies recognized Peter Laurie. Discretion, the better part of valor, they decided they'd back off this one and let her go.
She subsequently ended up taking us to the location where the incident that Bianchi related to us had occurred, and she described it exactly the way Bianchi described it.
As far as I know, they were laughing at us behind our backs. They thought Bianchi was just putting on a real great show for us and leading us down the primrose path. They didn't understand how we could be fooled so easily, I think.
But you feel that it's a difficult condition to understand?
Very difficult. I mean, we were trying to find out how these different sections of his mind were operating, and in the process, there had to be a leakage from one to the other. We could not help that. And when there's a leakage, then there's a change in the status. The part that didn't know about things now knew about things.
So that means he can change from month to month?
That means he can change from day to day. And there was at least one point where he had a major change where one night a lot of awareness of the crime suddenly came into his mind. He became acutely suicidal. He called for his lawyer. They had a meeting, and he calmed down. From then on, he had no doubt he had done the crime. And he certainly was a great deal different to an examiner because he didn't deny it anymore.
In July 1979, 6 months after his arrest, Ken Bianchi, as Ken, began to remember the Los Angeles murders. Without hypnosis, he described them to Dr. Lundy.
And then they were brought into, all the killings occurred in the spare room next to the bathroom.
Wait a minute, we skipped the sex here.
Oh, we're not there yet.
Oh, okay. Hands are tied, and then they're taken to...
Hands are tied, and then they're taken into the spare room next to the bathroom. That's when there was sex with the girls. After that, they were untied, allowed to dress themselves, tied up again, and they sat back on the bed. And meanwhile, everything was made ready. They were then...
What did that involve, everything made ready?
Getting the rope to kill them with.
Okay.
Or whatever.
Okay.
I can't believe I'm talking about this. I've come a long way, Dr. Lundy.
4 experts now agreed Bianchi was insane, and the county prosecutor feared he could go free.
I was very concerned. I spoke to the defense attorney, and he's a person I've worked with on many cases, and he's a very straightforward attorney. And he was absolutely convinced that Mr. Bianchi was a multiple personality and felt that he could actually convince me of that. And he believed that he would be acquitted by reason of insanity. That concerned me a great deal because that meant he would be out on the streets if he could just convince a number of psychiatrists that he was cured of his problem, which I felt he could easily do.
So how did you handle this?
We sought an expert in hypnosis, and in fact we obtained a worldwide recognized expert, Dr. Orn.
Dr. Martin Orn is professor of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania. Could he shed new light on Kenneth Bianchi?
He seemed like a pleasant, cooperative individual, but whenever I see an individual in a forensic situation, somebody accused of premeditated murder facing a death penalty, I always have to ask myself, is this individual telling me how he really feels, or is he malingering or faking? Because after all, there's a tremendous motivation to appear insane and that way not be responsible for the things he did. And so that before you can make a diagnosis, well, I have to decide whether he is for real.
I've met Ken, but I haven't met Steve yet. So I'd like to meet Steve for a bit. What do you want? I'd like to talk to you. I want a fucking cigarette. I don't have a cigarette. Give me a cigarette.
During hypnosis, Steve appeared for Dr. Orn as he had for Drs. Watkins and Allison.
I can't relax unless I have a cigarette.
But this time, there was a new surprise. Other personalities also appeared.
I knew that he had been appointed by the prosecuting attorney, and the hopes were that he would demolish the insanity defense by showing no evidence of a multiple personality. And here I saw the personalities laid out. Ken was there, and clearly Steve came out, and then we had this little boy that was a scared little kid. And I thought, my goodness, Dr. Orn's now on the side of truth and justice. He will now be able to testify that he's got multiple personalities. So I was very happy with it. I thought it was a very good presentation.
But Dr. Orn thought there was another possibility. Bianchi could be faking. Orn asked Bianchi directly.
You have to recognize, given your ability and your motivation, the possibility of your using a multiple personality, perhaps even using some of the psychiatrists, psychologists who saw you to your own ends, has to be considered very seriously. Sure, absolutely. And I don't think it has been considered thus far. How do I know that you didn't kind of cook this?
Is Dr. Orn right? Did Bianchi cook it? The other psychiatrists were convinced he was insane. The police were equally convinced that Bianchi had fooled the experts. They feared that two mass murderers, Bianchi and his cousin Angelo Bono, could go free. But can the police prove their case? Is Kenneth Bianchi insane, or is he a cold-blooded killer faking insanity?
Next week, we'll bring you part 2 of The Mind of a Murderer. Dr. Martin Orn, the psychiatrist brought in by the prosecution, continues his study of Kenneth Bianchi. Dr. Orn pulls a dramatic surprise. He replays key sections of the interview tapes, retests Bianchi, and submits a startling diagnosis. Kenneth Bianchi is a streetwise and dangerous psychopath who brilliantly fooled 4 psychological experts.
Either he is giving me a barefaced lie, and he's been accused of being a pathological liar by many people, or the same thing could be explained by his being multiple personality and really not knowing. And the problem is to distinguish between these two possibilities. The behavior could be explained in both ways.
I couldn't see that this was fake. I couldn't see that it was a play act. And I really couldn't comprehend his reasoning. I was totally baffled.
Well, he's a man with a tremendous ego that is intelligent and has the ability to do whatever he wants to do. But he is also a multiple murderer.
Who is right, Dr. Orn or the other experts? The surprising conclusion to the mind of a murderer, next week on Frontline. I'm Judy Woodruff.
For a transcript of this program, please send $4 to Frontline, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. Major funding for Frontline was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding was provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. For video cassette information about Frontline, write to PBS Video, Box 8092, Washington, D.C., 20024.